So this is Danielle. I'm here with Jensen in product growth, and we are exploring um, opinionated stage expansion thoughts around combinations of products that tend to lead to conversion. So we can think about what content we might prioritize improving on the website to drive those kinds of journeys. And this is related to the website refresh epic. This will be a private video. So if you're watching and this is not private, please make it private. Jensen, tell me what we're looking at.
All right, so what we're looking at here is a combination of stages utilized by a namespace. So it could be any multiple users. Basically, you could have like one user using verify or 10 users using plan. It still counts as like they use this feature. And what we want to see is the conversion rate that this grouping of stages drives in the product. And what's really interesting about this isn't necessarily like these highest converted stages, because we already know that the more stages a user adopts, the more likely they are to convert. It's sort of like the more pieces of the DevOps process that you start using at GitLab, the more opportunity that you have to run into a feature that you need that's in a higher tier, so it drives you more to convert. But the biggest takeaway from this is the conversion rate at very specific groupings of stages. So these in particular are one of the highest converting groupings. If you look at just create and plan together, there is a 0.77% conversion rate. Just to give you an idea, our normal conversion rate is 0.09%. So this is significantly higher than the average or the total conversion rate. And then if you look at create and verify, so create is code storage repos. Verify is they've kicked off a pipeline. So this is like code storage and CI. We have a 0.7% conversion rate. It's an amazing conversion rate. Our goal on conversion is to increase our conversion rate from 0.09% to 0.5%. That would be like an amazing increase for the company. So seeing these at 0.7% is that's huge. Those are huge numbers. Bear in mind though that when you're looking at this, these are a singular metric. So when we look at create, it's actually MRs created, not that they actually uploaded their code to a repo. It just looks at, okay, they created an MR, and then plan is like they created an issue. It's the same with create. It would be they created an MR and they they spun up a pipeline. So if we look at, they actually uploaded their code and then spun up a pipeline, we might see something differently. Just remember, MRs here are more geared slightly towards teams, because why would you create an MR just for yourself to review? So just bear that in mind when you're looking at this data, and we're trying to update that information right now. But it's encouraging to see conversion rate is so dramatically affected by only an adoption of 2 of the right stages. So if we were to drive users to focus in those areas, we could have a dramatic impact on users finding success in the product.
So can I ask a couple maybe dumb questions, just partly for my benefit and partly for anyone who's watching this later?
Sure.
What is the acronym SMAN at the top here?
Yeah, so that is, it's actually been updated to
SMAU?
No, it's actually span.
Okay.
Stages per active namespace. Okay. What this is looking at is it's what we originally named that, which is stage monthly active namespace. So okay. What it's really saying is like in a specific month, how many stages did that namespace use?
Okay. And then is the grouping in order of adoption in terms of the kind of which stage they entered first?
No, it's not in any specific order. So it's really just
Combination, and then we lay them out kind of in what we believe is the order, right?
actually I think this is in alphabetic order.
Oh, it's just alphabetic. Okay. Um, would there be a way to get the order that they adopt in?
We do have that, but it's not super useful because of the way that we're calculating these metrics. So
Mm,
again, like with create, it's just looking at an MR created. So by the time you create an MR, you may have uploaded your code, you may have kicked off a pipeline, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of the times we see, like when we look at order, verify is number one
okay.
because we're missing a lot of the people who go to like kick off a pipeline without ever creating an MR. And so we need to sort of clarify these metrics and get a little bit
Yeah.
deeper into feature usage in order to make that useful.
I
But I
think it's
can,
already super valuable. The only thing I'm wondering about from like a marketing content perspective, so I think you had like row 10 or 11, create, plan, and create, verify. I would just love to know um, what content to show first to kind of align with what is most likely to be the first thing they need to accomplish goals wise. So like if it is actually verify that is the first thing happening, I wouldn't want to just assume, oh, because these both start with create, I should drive create content. Like seems to me like getting someone to create an MR, while it is important and it's a necessary result, it's like probably not the thing I would like market to them first. I would probably
oh,
focus on
sure,
the
yeah.
value of like verify or something.
Right. And I think that in terms of like from a marketing perspective, create is really just like the originator. It's not where you start the conversation. That like the value comes in at all the things that connect to create, not in create itself. Create
I
is sort of
noticed it's a very like in terms of what do all these top ones have in common? I see verify is in all of them for the first 9, and
right.
then also number 11. Do you
Yeah.
think that is telling that is a common thing, or do you think that's just necessary because of the like how indicative is that of the value of verify versus just happens to be like, yes, if you have enough stages, you'll be at the top and verify happens to be in there. Like, is there actually a correlation there, or am I just seeing that? I don't want to make that data if it's not.
There's 100% there's a direct correlation there because most of the features at GitLab are driven from pipeline usage, right?
You kind of can't do a lot of these other things if you don't take that verify step, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Verify is the thing that connects all the other pieces together. And I mean, just bear in mind, like you don't actually need create, but you need verify. So you can host your code in Bitbucket or in GitHub or whatever, and come to GitLab. In order to get value, you have to use verify.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So
and
this is
so,
really interesting too. So on row 16, we see create by itself. And then on row 22, we see verify by itself. So we see those two conversion rates, 0.11 and then 0.42. But then the combined conversion rate is higher. Like if I start doing like math with some of these combinations, you can, that difference, that additional value is like the lift, I guess, is what you would say.
yeah, I
Um,
mean, that's
do
where I
you,
see like the aha moment happens. And this is the hypothesis we talked about earlier, but
mhm.
the aha moment that I believe is the biggest one for GitLab is when one stage automatically kicks off another stage.
Okay.
And so that could be, create and plan. You can have MRs automatically close issues. Can be create and verify.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because create kicks off a pipeline. But yeah, like as soon as you see that aha moment, the value of GitLab in your mind goes dramatically up.
So I have a question about rows 8 and 9. I noticed that both of them don't have create in them, which is super interesting because you said create is the MR creation stage. Is this
Mm-hmm.
because it's a person working by themselves that doesn't need to make MRs?
It could be, yeah. I mean, MRs, I think again are more geared towards teams. It's hard to know without like having real in-depth data,
Mm-hmm.
like what's actually happening there. So once we have data on, okay, they just like submitted code or pushed code to a Git repository. Once we have that as the create metric, I think we'll get a lot more insight into like, oh, okay, this is how, total usage is actually happening versus team usage.
Right.
Um,
So the thing
MRs
I'm
don't.
thinking of is like, if you had to tell me, so in row 10, you got create plan. So I look at the list at like, what's the next most likely bucket? And it looks like it's row 6, create plan verify. And that moves it from 0.7% to 1.6. What a big jump. I'm wondering if I should, from a content perspective, literally just map out how do we just get each of these buckets to the next logical bucket that it would be in. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because it's like, there's actually probably not actually that many paths. So we're looking at combinations, right? But there's actually not a ton of different paths because ultimately we're getting to all this. I mean, I don't even know, what is it like? I mean, there's probably 5 paths that actually matter and a bunch of other edge case paths is what I'm looking at here.
I think for like the ability to communicate broadly to a customer set, you can't necessarily talk about the value of like secure yet when in your acquisition, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that you can sort of mention it, but it's not central to the conversation. The real value of GitLab is like, again, I think it doesn't necessarily start with create because that's more of like a commodity at this point. I mean, but it's the Lego pieces that connect on top of that you need, but you don't have to do any additional work for, like you would with our competitors.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm looking at here is just, so let's just take each alone stage, by itself. So let's just take verify, for example. We could just build a model that, and you already have all the data here, to just say, okay, whatever place you're starting from, and we know they basically start from either plan or verify, right? Because it's either issues or it's pipelines. It's not create because that's sort of like a necessary next step. If we just, and I'm pretty sure verify is like much more valuable starting point than plan, right, just based on what I'm seeing here. But to say we just take those two because we know from sales that those are the two starting points for their conversations. I'd love to just approach it from two sides. So from one side is like, how do we drive the user behavior in the product? And the other is how do we match the buying journey that sales already knows works? And then just stack rank the content that we either create or refresh based on that. I mean, the next challenge, of course, is how do we actually get the user to see that content at the time that they need it? That's our other challenge that we have. But even just knowing that that content is all in really good condition and that it's like available to help them. And also probably there's gaps. There's probably just stuff that's like locked up in docs that's really good that needs to make its way onto the marketing site.
Yeah, I would agree that I think that painting a picture of what you can do after you host your code, like what you can do with verify, because I need to clarify the metric for verify for a second too. Mm-hmm. Because verify is just looking at a pipeline was spun up, and we sort of assume that release is the next step, which would be their deploying code mm-hmm. to AWS or Google Cloud or whatever. But we only count it as release if it fits a very specific pattern. So only if they're deploying in the way that we want them to deploy do we count it as release.
Right, because I think you can deploy, I think what we did with our COVID project was we just deployed with a pipeline, and then we actually set up the release functionality. We didn't really need to. It was like what we were doing was so simple.
Right, and there are open source products out there that handle deployment for you, like serverless mm-hmm. or there's another big one. But what I mean by that is, like, if we're going to use language to educate people about these combinations, I think we need to do some deeper research to understand what people are actually using those pipelines for. Because
my question for you is, does it even matter if it seems like this takes up a life of its own at a certain point. Like you can see these conversion rates, they take off pretty dramatically. I'm wondering, like, if we just get you from verify to verify plus create, And then if we, like, that's the biggest step. And then if we gently nudge you towards adding plan or release, basically after we get you 3 stages, do you really need us? Or is it almost like the product pulls you along itself? Because that's what this would make me think. What do you think?
I think that's exactly right. I think that like not only our research into self-hosted instances really shows that like once you sort of understand that, oh, I can make this work, it's the buying decision happens at that point, even if you're not fully integrated with the product. You just sort of have a plan to integrate, right? I mean, the buying decision happens when you're like, oh, okay, like I get it now. GitLab can sort of connect these Lego pieces together. You don't need to know all the details of like what's in security. You just think like, oh, I could probably use security. My company needs that.
So if you had to put a dollar sign, you know, like, so these are overall conversion rates, like total conversion, but I'm imagining there's some point where like you're still a free user and you've used some of these things, but then there's a moment where the conversion happens. How often is that dollar sign after just one stage versus 2? Like I imagine these were in order. I know that they're not, but imagine I was saying, okay, you verify, I've got, you know, my initial pipeline running, then create, then I make an MR. Have I paid GitLab at that point, or am I actually still able to do, you know, I'm doing these things for free? Like, what is the aha moment in the product? I think I understand, but what's the aha moment for the purchase in this flow?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think that's a question we don't have enough data to answer, to be honest with you. Like,
do you think we could combine this data with how many people are so for example, if we could take this and we could pivot it on buckets, like less than 10 people or something, right? I don't know.
Let me get ahead of you there.
Cool.
Give me 1 second. Okay. Let me pull this up. All right, share my screen. All right, so what you're seeing here is the count of our namespaces. So this is the number of namespaces with 1 user in it, right? And this is 1 user before day 7. So the namespace was created within 7 days. They only had 1 user. Here's the conversion rate, 0.081%. If they add another user, their conversion rate goes up to 0.64%.
Okay, so you said our average conversion rate before was 0.09, right?
For total, right.
And you said that first conversion rate was what? 0.08? Yeah, so is adding other than the stages we talk about, is adding the second user like one of the most important things that could happen?
It's like, other than stage adoption, well, and to be fair, like stage adoption is actually driven by number of users also, which I can show.
So this is another opportunity that I see for marketing, which is like making sure it's very clear that we express the value of adding another person and the fact that adding another person is still free. And so there's really very little risk to you to take that step as a user.
And that's a lot of what growth is concentrating on right now.
Cool.
Is okay.
So for example, you could imagine us making a rule, like if we're going to show humans on the marketing pages of our website, like pictures, we always show people together. Like, I know it sounds really basic, but those types of things, like applied at scale, would matter a lot. Like, or even just talking about things with the assumption that you're working in a team.
Right. Yeah, I think that like we definitely need to focus on one, either making an individual a team, or onboarding a team rather than onboarding a person.
So it looks like the interesting thing I want to point out is like the conversion rate continues to climb. I'm kind of going to disregard the 6 and 8 going down because I don't really know that it matters for the trend so much. But it's amazing. Like if we expand this chart out further, does the conversion rate go up? Like can we look at more than just 10 users?
This is 10 within the first 90 days.
Okay.
And like 10 users before 90 days, 10 users before 7 days. We can go further out. I don't think it'll keep climbing. It sort of evens off around 9 and 10 when I looked at it, but I can't really remember.
That could just be the average size too of like a organization. But the thing I'm wondering about is, so say that I made an effort in marketing to get you to go from 1 user to 2. It's kind of like my other question about stages. Do we need to convince them to go from 2 to 3, or does it happen naturally once you add the second person? It looks like this kind of has I know it doesn't visually look like it, but the jump from 0.08 to whatever this next is much bigger than any other jump here. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, how much effort does it need to go into talking about big teams versus just, hey, collaborate with one other person?
Yeah, I think that if we were to concentrate on getting a single user to add one more, that would be like money well spent. But the thing is that like in the product, if we were to make it easier for an administrator to add people at any given point to let's say just like no thought process, like the person goes, oh, I'll just add one extra user to the product, so that they jump from 2 to 3, right, or 3 to 4. Like if we can push them up one user inside the product, then that's like, again, like really well invested time and energy. But I think on the marketing side, it sort of does make sense to just like try to get them to add one user.
I mean, I think the big thing I would imagine is like what we should do is we should help them set the intention that, oh, I'm signing up and I'm immediately going to invite someone. Like just set that up as like, that's just what we expect you're going to do. And everything in your journey pre-conversion is like, just looks like, of course you would do that. My other question is, we looked at this other chart before and we saw the conversion rates. I feel like the highest converting one was basically all the stages and it was about 4.7%. Is that right? Roughly around there?
Yes, I think so. Oh,
so what's really interesting to me is on day 7, I see that we crossed 4% as our conversion rate, or not day 7, on 7 users, we crossed roughly the same conversion rate. I'm already thinking like, well, I'm not going to focus on optimizing past this point because like and at this point, I'm not sure if this is a better lever or if the stages is a better lever. I think you probably see what I mean. Like there's sort of an equilibrium between like these two choices. But one thing I'm really curious about is if we looked at the 7 users scenario, how often would that 7 user scenario also involve all the stages? Like, you know what I mean? Like their conversion rates are very similar. So I wonder if there's a point at which we basically reach saturation of our effort.
Yeah. I am trying to find, what I'm trying to find here, I know I've created it, is span stages per active namespace by user count.
Cool.
Let's see. I don't think that's it. This is just my Scratchpad, by the way.
Yeah, so thanks for letting me into your secret data nerd world here.
Yeah, which is why it's so disorganized.
I mean, I already have some huge takeaways here in terms of like highest impact identifying things. I think the jumping off path from verify and the jumping off path from plan, mapping those out and supporting those with good quality content pre-conversion, and then also helping set an intention on behalf of the user that they're going to invite a friend immediately upon conversion. Like if we just focus on those things in this coming quarter as like prioritization of which content to refresh, those are already 3 great experiments. So, I mean, I want to see more because I love digging into this data, but already I feel like those are low-hanging fruit. Do you think there's some other bucket that I just haven't asked about that you would say is another major indicator of conversion?
No, those are the biggest indicators. So here's stage count by user. Yes. So here's number of namespaces in blue here. There's 1 million with 1 user. Then it sort of goes down, with 1 stage, right?
Yep. Okay, this is interesting. Stage count by user count. Okay, so we see a pretty big drop off at 4. 2 and 3 are about equal. We don't see which ones they are, but I'm guessing that's the 2 combinations you showed me. It's either create verify or create plan.
Right. Which is a lot of I think why we would want to, I, I think, drive towards like 2 users. There's not a huge increase um, in stage adoption when you get up to 3 users, but there is a big increase in conversion rate. So I think,
Yeah.
anyways, so the point of this is like adoption of stages and adoptions of the right stages are indicators of conversion.
Mm-hmm.
These are just indicators of conversion, not necessarily like the end goal is conversion, not to drive additional users, right? I want to make
Yeah.
that.
And also I think it's about, it's not like we're coming up with something that they weren't already trying to do. Like their intentions and the things they want to accomplish with GitLab's products already exist, even if we didn't exist. It's much more about like, how hard is it for them to get to that place? Like how much friction do they encounter? Because it's not
Exactly.
like we made them want to write MRs. They needed to write MRs to achieve some business goal. So it's like they already have goals. I think what this tells us is just like what their intentions are. Like I think your point about verify is really interesting, which is like one reason we know people come and adopt GitLab over GitHub is we have a really great CI/CD solution. So knowing that that's their intention and knowing that the typical verify journey looks a certain way, I probably screwed around for a couple days, even just setting up my own new GitLab project, just being like, what should I set up next? Kind of I know I'm going to need all these things to run my project, but how should I pick what pieces to work on? And I know you're working on that on the product side, but on the marketing side, we can also prime the user better to just tell them what to do. Like
Right.
people like being told what to do. It's relaxing to have someone say, here's a typical first 72 hours with your GitLab project experience. Like if you follow this checklist, I would love if the product reflected this too, but that's a lot of work to do in product that it's like, it's just text on a page in marketing and we can change it. So if you discover that like the guide doesn't actually match what they do, the effort to change that is so much lower than the effort to change it in the product.
Yeah, but you do make a good point, which is you talked about like if they're creating an MR, they have a business need, right?
Mm-hmm.
we're we don't yet know how to create that business need.
Oh, I don't think we have to create it though.
I think in some ways, like for a lot of these 1 and 2 user namespaces, we should not, I mean, not necessarily be like creating the need, but we need to sort of show them a little bit of like uh, get their brain turning in terms of like ideas of how their project should be working, rather than relying on them to be like, oh, this is what I need. And so I think that's like what I mean by ultimately driving conversion is that
Okay.
like a lot of this education shouldn't necessarily be like, oh, we're relying on you to be the expert. We are the expert. We're telling you like your first 72 hours should look like this, not your first 72 hours typically look like this. It's
Yeah.
like you, how do you want to set up your project? You're setting it up by using, I don't know, let's say serverless to deploy your code to AWS. Like here's what that looks like.
Well, it's so funny. So like I was thinking about what was my first MR for our new project for this COVID project. And it was the README actually. It was documenting here's how everything, like here's kind of like the initial architecture that we're gonna have. Like even just basic stuff like, we've decided to use AWS, like it's configured this way. I know it's a README, so it's not an MR that like drives deployment, but it was a really important MR because I couldn't collaborate with anybody else until I wrote those things down, because that was basically the instructions for how to set up your local development environment to work together. I almost wonder if we could templatize to some extent that first README entry and say like typical READMEs, or a good README will let you collaborate with other people. Here are the things that should go in your README. And I wonder how much that would help. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we did with our test that we're running right now, which is trying to onboard people with a project management board
Cool.
and walking them through a little bit of this process. I think we're going to find that we need to do a little bit more hand holding. So in in terms of like what you're talking about with the README, GitLab is very much a read these things culture. But when you're a developer and you're starting to spin up 15 different tools, you don't have time to read like every single thing. You're just like coming and kicking the tires as quickly as you can. The first tool that you find that you can figure out is the one you're going to go with.
But what about when you're working with another person, right? Like, so say you and I start a project together and I'm like, cool, I've got it up and running on my computer. Let's get you running. If we don't write it down, what do you think do you think they just sit together kind of pair style and it's like, oh, let me just get your development environment working too. Like that person who set it up just sets up the other person and doesn't.
Yeah, that's a great point. But like what you're, so in your scenario though, those two users are jointly setting something up when I think like for the most part, like one person's going to come in, set up GitLab, and then invite another person once it's
But even if it's set up, I still have to set up my local development environment. So I guess what I'm wondering is like, so the only reason I'm talking about this README is not because I'm doing this because of GitLab. It's, although GitLab's definitely made me better at writing things down. I mean, when I set up Mattermark or Referrally, I was the first person in both those cases. And it was like, am I really going to take each person's laptop and set up their local environment? Like after the first one, I was like, no way, I'm not doing this. So I'm just wondering, to your point about being opinionated, maybe maybe this is a thing to drive, right? Is like,
yeah, that's a great point.
You are alone.
I was talking about separating like the first user and their interaction with GitLab and inviting a second user to become productive. Those two things are different actions.
Yeah.
And we do have a concept of invited user onboarding that's
cool.
actually similar to how we onboard people onto GitLab as a company, not as
as an onboarding issue and stuff.
Yeah, so basically we'll have pre-canned onboarding issues that when you invite a user, they're immediately assigned that issue and they walk through a checklist inside that issue. But those can be custom built by the administrator. That's what we're thinking with that. And so, I can imagine a scenario where you go to invite your first user and as an onboarding step, as like the user who has set this up, and you click like, okay, I want this user to learn about CI/CD because that's what I'm using. I want them to learn about issues because I plan on using that. Blah, blah, blah. And when you invite them, it's like this list of like, okay, you just got assigned this issue, and here's like what you should be thinking about in your first 24 hours of now being a GitLab user. So
I got a question about that because I'm looking at the other chart you showed. I don't know if you have it on another tab, the conversion by stages. And I noticed that plan is only in the top. It's number 5 and number 9. And I would totally understand why we would want to like give everybody an issue board, because then plan is going to light up for each of these. But it's interesting because that's sort of artificial, right? Like it doesn't seem like that's naturally what users are trying to do. I'm not questioning the product choice. Like it's interesting. I want to see what happens for that. But for example, I didn't really use project management for the first several days of my project. We were more just like getting like the first commit and like get the thing live. I just am wondering if that's like, developers don't love issues. We have to use them because like otherwise we couldn't be organized. But I'm not like, ooh, yeah, like I want to write an issue today. Like it's definitely not, something I get excited about. But I do get excited about writing MRs and making commits. So I'm just kind of wondering a little bit, like, so I'm thinking about the third bucket we talked about, which is like going from user 1 to user 2. I'm basically thinking like, how do I entice user 2 to come play in my project? Like, I'm probably not going to entice them with an issue. Like that's more like the stick. The carrot would be like, hey, this is ready for you to commit to now. So and I'm thinking about doing that in marketing.
What you're talking about is a lot of the reason why we haven't worked on this, because let me see if I can find that. Let me stop sharing my screen real quick. Well, anyways, I can just go over it with you without sharing the data. So when you talk about enticing a user to your project or namespace, when someone invites a user to their namespace, that person only accepts the invitation 25% of the time.
Wow, that's really low. I would have expected it to almost be 100%, like it's
Yeah.
a coworker or something, and of course they're going to help.
In projects, it's closer to 75%. So if you're inviting someone to a project, it's closer to 75% acceptance rate, which is still low considering that you're actively inviting someone to collaborate with you. And so, you know, I see that as a slightly different problem. The enticement is slightly different than the onboarding of that person, because we should separate those two things. One is they only accept the invitation 25% of the time for a namespace, 75% of the time for a project. The other is they only go on to do an action in any stage, like 47 or 37% of the time. So once they accept the invitation, they're only 37% likely to actually do anything inside the product because they're not being onboarded correctly. So those two things, I think you're saying enticement is that whole journey. I think it should be separated into two, which is like, we need to tell them why they should accept the invitation to GitLab first, get them to accept it by like reminding them, you know, that they have this invitation and accepting it. And then we need to make them active and productive users on the platform. So those two things are different problems.
It reminds me of, remember in Facebook, how when you first adopted Facebook, like it was almost always because someone had tagged you in a picture. I feel like I wanted to start tagging this person in like issues and being like, okay, accept the invite, because like I'm literally assigning things to you.
Right.
Can you tag someone who's just only invited, who hasn't actually accepted yet?
No, but Tim Hay is running an experiment right now where you can basically do that. You can invite them directly from the issue.
Oh, that's cool. Because then it's like, oh, please help me with this very specific thing.
Right.
Nice.
So we're working on it. I still think that that piece has a pretty low engagement, mostly because if you think about our total usage, like people with one person in their GitLab namespace aren't necessarily going to be using issues like to a dramatic extent or inviting anyone. So even if they see that, they're going to be like, well, I don't really care about that. So it's going to have a low touch point anyways. But two is like that invitation email is never accepted. And that's a big problem. So let me just, before we jump off I want to share just a little bit of why I think that is, why the invitation rate to namespaces is so low. And that is because, or this is my hypothesis, which we'll end up testing. It's higher for projects because it's more likely you're going to be inviting a developer to interact directly with something that's very clear on what you're working on. You're working on a project, and it's likely not, you know, like a salesperson or something like that. It's a developer coming on to work on a specific problem in your project. Whereas a namespace is much more nebulous invitation. It's like, could go out to the entire company. It could go out to like salespeople and support people and product managers and a whole bunch of people who are sort of like, I don't even know what GitLab is. I don't know why I would accept this invitation. And so that's why I think that the acceptance rates are so dramatically different, but it's still a problem either way.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. And it's an ensemble effect. Like I know that some of these further down the funnel things we're talking about, I won't prioritize them as highly from a marketing perspective, because like until we fix the further up the funnel things, it doesn't really matter as much. But I think some of this issue of enticement is also part of how we would get them from stage to stage. Because it's like, I want to set a vision for like, once you have your project up and running, what's that going to look like? What's that going to feel like? So that you want that, and you like are willing to stick with us through the whatever friction arises, which I'm sure there still is some. That you're like, okay, but I have this vision in my mind that's super clear about like, I'm doing this stuff because I'm going to get to this good place that I want to get to. Right now, I just don't see any like sign of that like vision setting. Like if you go to our website, it's very focused on like pretty much like a very long range business outcome or a very short range action. There's not really like that mid-range experience of like, okay, I'm in the project now. I've been doing this for a few weeks. It's feeling good and I'm productive. I don't know, does that resonate with you at all? Like, do you think I'm barking up the right tree thinking about that?
It does. I think that you I think mentioned like the middle part. I don't think we have the front part either.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
I think we speak toward the long-term vision of like where you should go using a single platform.
Mm-hmm.
But when you sign up for GitLab, we drop you into the product and that's it. I mean, it's like you're on your own.
Yeah.
We assume that you already know Git. We assume that you already know like where you want to get started. We make a lot of assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
and developers more than any other group are more willing to go like kick the tires and dive deep and sort of assume that they know what they're doing and navigate the website and try to figure it out. Um, so we've been lucky in like people finding their way to get started. But if we really wanted to drive the, like specific, um, like I think that you're right. Like we're communicating the long term vision, but if we were to focus on the short and medium term vision, that the long-term vision would carry itself because
Yep.
we can sort of make the assumption that if developers are willing to figure it out so much at the very beginning without actually even knowing the value of GitLab, once they know the value of GitLab, they'll figure it out.
Yep.
They'll do the work to figure it out from there. So we just need to drive them towards that understanding.
Because we have evidence that they get there
Right.
with the conversion rate. So I think there's a desire to skip steps, right? So like there's one way to look at the table you showed me before is like, oh, the conversion rate is highest when they've adopted all the stages. Let's just get them to adopt all the stages to get that conversion rate. But that's not actually how this works because it's a cumulative ensemble effect, step by step. We don't really get to skip steps, is what I think I'm hearing you say. And it sounds like whether it was with data or just our default, like wanting to tell our big vision and be aspirational or whatever, our message makes so many assumptions about what is it, capability? Like what will cause you to not make it all the way to the end? Because like you come to GitLab with an intent to at least like get a website live or a product live or whatever. What do you think are like the top, not objections from like a business spending the dollars perspective, but from like I was trying to get going and I failed to get going perspective? Do you have any thoughts on what are the biggest problems?
I think that in terms of the well, let's just say like create and verify. If we were to just look at those,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where our lowest barriers to what you're talking about, where sort of like the throw your hands up situation where they're like, I can't figure this out. I'm off on my way. Those have the lowest barriers, which is why we see the most success. Like people are coming to get those configured, and then they're generally successful in doing that. I don't think that they have a perfect success rate, like, but that's what people know us for. That's the problem they're coming to solve, and that's what they're driving towards. I do think that when you get to like security, for example, people will integrate with security. They'll sign up for a trial, they'll test out security, they'll integrate with it, they'll upgrade to gold, and then they'll be like, oh, this doesn't actually do what I want it to do, and they downgrade to back to silver. And so there's like once you get deeper into the product, you get those more like moments of like I can't figure this out. But at at the very front end, like the very specific problem set to just get a website up and running, I'm not sure we see a lot of that.
Okay.
If that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it will.
Tell me what is the goal when we see package in here? What do they have to do in order for package to be triggered as a stage that they've done?
Yeah, so package as a metric isn't super reliable. I wouldn't use that.
Okay.
But in general, basically they have to add a Docker container to the package registry.
Okay. Makes sense. Yeah, I probably wouldn't use that as a major indicator then. Although I do see it in the top in 1, 2, or sorry, 1, 3, and 4. So I am wondering if it is a major, like, what I was wondering is, I guess, if it's like a major inflection point for the account. But now that you're saying I shouldn't trust it, I'm not sure how to use that.
Yeah, I wouldn't use it quite yet. I think it is a major inflection point. It's basically like once you have that integration set up, you're probably already deploying to
Yeah.
AWS or wherever, like, and it's just pulling from that container. So,
Well, so what I'm thinking, just popping up a level and sharing like what I've gotten out of this in terms of how it can guide the marketing strategy is our journey of improving our content is going to need to follow the funnel. So, we obviously want to touch the top first because that's where there's the most volume. And I want to try to drive the high impact things, partly because if we could get more throughput to the deeper stages, it wouldn't have to take as long to run the tests on the hypotheses. Right now, if we wanted to, focus on, 5 or 6 stage adoption, the volume that I'm seeing in this, it would be like months and months before you would know whether something helped. So part of it is just like literally the limitations of our own funnel. But the other part is I wonder if once we fix might not be the right word, once we address some of the low-hanging fruit, if new low-hanging fruit will emerge that we can't actually see right now. So like if I go and I focus on the verify path and the plan path and add another user from one path, and so basically saying, okay, through marketing content, we're going to form a vision for what this person should be doing, and we're going to tell that story pre-conversion. If that was a successful, like if all 3 experiments worked, or even if one of them did, your conversion metrics might look significantly different to the extent that we would actually restack, the list and then maybe pick totally different things. So I don't want to plan too far down, basically, is what I'm saying.
yeah, I think that that's fair. I think that it, again, like even if we were just like, I think we should pick something and just keep driving that, and just keep driving it deeper and deeper and deeper. And
Yep.
what, like, when you mentioned Facebook's was get someone to add, I think it was 8 users in the first 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
Because once they do that, then their news feed is populated and they see other people's stuff and they can comment and blah, 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 right? Like it's not the end goal, right? The end goal is to keep them coming back.
Right.
But what it does is it's the best possible indicator that they are going to keep coming back. And so if we were to drive, again, like one stage kicking off another, that's the best possible indicator that someone is going to come back and keep
Right.
using GitLab. So however deeply we want to do that, I think that that's more or less what I'm driving towards. And the best way to do that, add users, get the invitation flow to work, onboard the users correctly to get them started using the product faster. But I think we can keep driving that deeper by like, okay, do we want to handhold them? Do we want to, guide them through their specific architecture and how to set that up?
Mm-hmm.
As deeply as we can possibly get, maybe we should. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least we should start with making sure the jumping off point makes sense, because it looks like we're losing so I guess last question, and then I should let you go because I know we're way over, but this was extremely valuable. If they only ever adopt 2 stages, are they successful?
I think they're more successful in terms of conversion rate, right?
But are they successful? Like, do they actually achieve a meaningful goal, or is that like arguably like have they, in order for someone to pay us, they need to achieve some business goal that's like worth it to them to give us a piece? I'm wondering if they've achieved a meaningful business goal at only 2 stages.
I think absolutely they have. Like, are they going to pay GitLab top dollar for the value that it's created for them? Probably not. But they have, like, 2 stages gets you like meaningful value in terms of time saved.
So like if they were to go to work and they have 2 stages adopted and they've been using it for a while, and someone wants to say, what do you think of GitLab? Do you think that their response would be, oh, it's great, I'm using it every day? Or like, it's great, it's helping me, do something important?
I think in that case, the sentiment would be, it's amazing, it just works.
Yep. So that's incredibly valuable for us as something to draft off of, because that means our brand is already in a position where like we're already set up to get a lot of money out of these customers. Maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, and this is what I keep saying about like, yeah, we've got a lot of problems, but we've got a good product, is if the answer, if you had said, oh, they don't really care and the odds that they'll stick around is really low because they're just not getting a lot of value, we would have a real problem, because it's really like the effort we're going to take to go from one stage to two is significant. But it sounds like what you're saying is the ROI of going from 2 stages to 3 is probably the most important thing that happens.
I actually think that the ROI of going from 1 stage to 2 stages
okay.
is the most important, because 1 stage is like whatever, I can move anywhere. Like, let's say you started with Create, you could move to 15 other different companies in a second with Create. Let's say you started with Verify, it would be so easy to go to Circle CI, right? It's going to take you a day's worth of work to go to Circle CI and configure your pipeline to use that instead. So 1 stage is like, what's that?
Hang on 1 second, Jensen. I'm sorry. Hold on 1 second. Sorry, Jensen. I've got a worker here.
Oh, no worries.
Some things. Go ahead.
So anyways, the jump from 1 stage to 2 is probably the most important step that a user can take. The jump from 2 stages to 3, and it is an indication that that user is going to be a long-term successful user of GitLab. I think we can make that attribution. So if we were to say like 1 stage to 2 likely makes them a paying user, 2 stages to 3 likely makes them a long-term user.
Okay. Well, I think we just, in marketing, we focus on, well, really our long game obviously is queuing up anything we can do to help all the steps. But if you're saying you feel like 1 to 2 is super high leverage and you don't think that kind of that initial vision is set, then I would probably have marketing just focus on supporting that first.
Yeah.
Like, arguably, like, it's so funny, none of marketing's quote unquote goals are around revenue or stage adoption, which maybe that should be different. But I think what's so interesting is like a lot of the content I think people want to read and why they come to our website is actually about forming that vision of what their work life would look like if they adopted this thing. So it's important to, I'm kind of saying this for the benefit of anyone watching who might be like, Danielle, why are you asking all these questions about all these goals that have nothing to do with the goals of your team? But I think the way we're going to ultimately drive more traffic is by kind of offering a vision that people get excited about and want to share about, okay, how will my work life be different, or how will my day be different once I adopt this product?
Well, and solving the problem that they're coming immediately to solve. They're not coming to solve the 10-year plan of their company.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the people who care about that are investors, the public market, the executive buyer, like the enterprise buyer who, has already known about GitLab for a while and is now about to drop 6 figures. Like, they all care, and we should have that content. It's so funny though, because we've got a bunch of visionary content, but we've got an SMB mid-market conversion experience. So it's sort of like we're not really hitting it for either one of the audiences. So, okay, well, this is extremely helpful, and we're going through a process right now of stack ranking the top 2,000 most trafficked pages on About. I bet you can't even believe there's more than 2,000 pages, but there are. So what this does is it's letting me prioritize things that might like have low traffic but are like really crucial to this journey. It's also going to help me identify gaps where there's literally not a page. So like we didn't have an enterprise page. There's probably other non-existent pages. And then the last one is I'm going to go harvest docs for places where docs does a really good job expressing these things, but it doesn't like live in an SEO driven, marketing page that someone would like find. Cause like I think when you Google and you hit a docs page, unless you already are adopting this product, you don't read a docs page. So we have to make those marketing pages. Yeah. So what do you think of that? Any other things I'm missing or feedback you have?
No, I think that's great. That's exactly like what I was thinking. And when we attacked a pricing page, which is like, we need to expand this outward to marketing pages, because a lot of the links to documentation, it's way too early to link people to documentation at that point.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. So I will share this video with my team, especially the content team and the web team, but I think really actually anybody in marketing would benefit from hearing this conversation so they understand what we're trying to do with the website refresh. And I think what I owe you is an update on like how this influences the plans.
All right, sounds good.
Cool. Thanks.